Generations Bank has been serving the financial needs of the Finger Lakes region since 1870. Generations combines the best of modern banking with dedication to the local community. Visit them at mygenbank.com. Generations Bank, member FDIC, and equal housing lender.
December 7th, 2023. I'm Jim Sinacropi, and welcome to another edition of the Around the Lakes podcast here on FingerLakes1.com. John Kuri is a writer, musician, and an Emmy-nominated filmmaker who has produced 3 movies for Ron Howard, among a wide range of accomplishments throughout his career. His father was born in Mexico, a son of Lebanese immigrants who went on to win 2 Oscars, nominated 8 times for set decoration, and one of Walt Disney's key designers for Disneyland and Disney World. He also played a key role in creating the iconic holiday film It's a Wonderful Life. John is here in Seneca Falls to take part of the It's a Wonderful Life Festival in Seneca Falls this weekend. And today he's in studio with us to talk about his career, his father's career, and much more. But first, today's show is made possible thanks to support from GoNetSpeed. The future of connection is here, and it's fiber. Made for how we live and work today, GoNetSpeed Fiber is faster and stronger than anything out there. Check availability in your area as well as plans and pricing at GoNetSpeed.com and get ready for fast and reliable fiber internet straight to your home. And also Cafe 19, breakfast, lunch, pastries, celebratory cakes, pies, and catering, guaranteed fresh and always local at Cafe 19 in Seneca Falls. Also offering an assortment of beverages, including tea, coffee, and espresso drinks. Check out their full menus and weekly specials at xixcafe.com. And now they'll certainly be busy this weekend with the It's a Wonderful Life Festival back in action here in Seneca Falls. And as part of that, John Kuri will be appearing on Sunday at 2:30 along with Jimmy Hawkins, and a film of his documentary will also be shown Saturday at 11:30, and we'll talk all about that. But first, John, welcome to the studio and welcome to Seneca Falls.
Well, thank you. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. I love visiting Seneca Falls, and this whole experience with It's a Wonderful Life is just fabulous.
It is pretty phenomenal how it's taken hold not only here in Seneca Falls but across the world. And your father had a key role in creating the world of Bedford Falls, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But first, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your career, and what brings you to Seneca Falls.
Well, I grew up in the film business, of course, with my dad doing the things that he did. Traveled a great deal with him as being very privileged to have the experience of seeing how motion pictures were produced. So I kind of grew up in the industry and started out very, very early, came out of school and went to work for the Disney company at Disneyland. Spent my first 11 years there, working in park operations and then in design, and ran the decorating department at the park, and then was transferred into construction, maintenance, and development of new attractions, design, what have you. At the time, Walt knew that he was expanding into Disney World, and he wanted to develop young talent. So I was very privileged to be selected amongst about 25 other guys about my age, and we were moved through every division of the company, worked in every single department, and spent tremendous time learning the operations of the company. So by the time I hit the stage myself of becoming a decorator and working full-time in film, I had this tremendous world of experience thanks to Walt Disney that gave me a launching place. And then I went out into the independent field and eventually gravitated to writing, developing my own projects, producing, creating films, and it's been a remarkable experience, but thankfully made it possible because my dad cracked open that door for me due to his own accomplishments.
Yeah, let's talk about your father, Emile Kuri. and then we'll circle back and talk a little bit about what's going on here in Seneca Falls this weekend. You're going to have a film, a documentary shown on Saturday. But, the interesting thing about your father was he's a son of Lebanese immigrants born in Mexico, and he just played such a key role in creating these iconic American institutions, whether it's creating the world of Bedford Falls in It's a Wonderful Life, or helping to build Disneyland and Disney World. So just talk a little bit about that story.
Well, he grew up in Cuernavaca, which is the capital of Mexico. It's a beautiful city, and it actually, of North America, it has the oldest standing classic architecture buildings. And Dad grew up around that kind of influence. His father and mother were very sophisticated people, and there was a lot of elegance in the home. He had a keen appreciation for all of that, but he obviously was very drawn to the aesthetics of the world and design and what have you. He was a consummate reader and took in information, became very facile with research. So when he finally ends up in Los Angeles, immigrating during the revolution in Mexico, he kind of miraculously, an opportunity unfolded. He was working at a furniture store that was owned by a Lebanese elder from the Los Angeles community who offered him a job. And the job was working as a clerk. And one day, the decorators were all out to lunch. My dad was the only person on the floor. And in those days, people need to understand that men went to work wearing a coat and tie. It didn't matter if you were a janitor or if you were an executive. You wouldn't make the distinction looking at somebody on the street. So there he is, shirt and tie, on the floor room, no one else. He's dusting. The door opens and he sees a very elegant young woman walk into the store. She's obviously a client. He folds the dust cloth, puts it in his pocket, walks up to her, and asks her if he could help her. 20 minutes later, the decorators return and see who he is talking to. They recognize her immediately. They try to intercede. She won't have any part of it. She is now fascinated with what he is telling her. And it turns out that she is the wife of the very famous producer, Hal Roach, who had one of the most important studios in Hollywood at that point, was making all of the marvelous Spanky and Our Gang comedies and what have you. She goes home, and when Hal Roach comes home for dinner, sits down at the table, he is having a fit because the decorators can't get the set right for a Zorro film that they are producing, and he doesn't know what he's going to do. And his wife looks at him and says, "I have just the guy for you." A phone call goes to the Hennessy furniture store, and that next morning, my father is sent over to the studio. He's hired. He does the set for Zorro. They love it. Hal Roach is perfectly happy. End of story. He goes back to his job. But about 2 months later, the same thing happens. Hal Roach is now doing a movie with Cary Grant and Constance Bennett, Topper. And they can't get the Art Deco set correct. And he calls for my dad.
Amazing.
He comes to the studio, does the set, and that launched him into the industry.
So if Hal Roach's wife doesn't go furniture shopping on that day, everybody's life is different. And these films, like It's a Wonderful Life is different. And Disneyland and Disney World's a little different. It's just amazing how a chance encounter can,
That is so true. And if he didn't have the courage to fold the rag, put it in his pocket, and walk up to her,
right,
and ask her if he could help,
yeah,
it's that's a very inspiring point. Anyway, so an immigrant to America with all of the background that he had, look at Frank Capra, an immigrant to America. When those two men came together, they understood each other, and they understood from where they came, and they knew they could work together. Capra knew he could depend on my dad. My dad was introduced to Capra by way of David O. Selznick, who my dad had been under contract to on a number of films he had done with him. So the Capra-Emile Kuri relationship was very, very strong.
And it's amazing when you think about that, not only your father, but Frank Capra, an immigrant, and they worked together to create, you know, like just a iconic American film. And so I assume that first came It's a Wonderful Life, and the Disneyland and Disney World work came later. So, and it is It's a Wonderful Life weekend in Seneca Falls. So let's talk a little bit about that. What were some of the challenges that your father helped to overcome because one thing, you know, it's a great story, It's a Wonderful Life. Probably the main reason that movie's been so timeless is just an awesome story. But to tell the story, you need to create this world of Bedford Falls in upstate New York, sleepy village in the middle of winter, Christmas time. But it was filmed, of course, in Los Angeles. So just talk about some of the stories that your father passed on to you about how he made that film.
Well, it's kind of amusing. You think about being in Los Angeles, the film being shot during warm weather, and they're creating winter scenes on that 4-city block long town that they built. The big challenges, I mean, there's many challenges in the film when you consider the fact it really starts in 1919 when the George Bailey character goes into the pond to save his brother.
Right.
And then you jump several years to a little bit older. He's working in Gower Drugstore. And then you jump to the guy who was about to go off to college, and then you jump into the war years. So you have 4 very distinct changes in time where technology is changing also. You go from an era where gas lamps were being used, oil lamps were being used, candles were being used, to electricity.
Yeah.
Everything that you look at, from storefront windows to the interiors to what's on the exterior of the streets, all of these things have to be changed. They have to be changed seasonally. They have to be changed for the era. So you've got 4 distinct eras, and then you have daytime, you have nighttime, all with different requirements, and then you have seasonal changes.
Summertime, wintertime, sure.
So for a decorator, you know, there's a number of ways decorators can approach things. My dad was so accomplished and so thorough. Every single thing he did had meaning. It had reason. And whether, you know, you're looking at the way the Christmas tree is decorated or what is chosen to be on a bookshelf behind somebody's head, every single thing had purpose, had meaning. Frank Capra, who had been, as I said earlier, introduced by David O. Selznick to my dad's work, had a tremendous regard for him and knew that he was going to give him a functional set that the actors could work with tactily. They could pick up things that would sell a moment. There's a particular scene in the Bailey building during that moment where Jimmy Stewart, playing George Bailey, gets in Potter's face, defending the honor of his dad.
Yeah, when he was a younger boy.
And I would ask this audience that's going to watch this film again, just take note of when Jimmy Stewart leans in and he's really addressing Potter. What's right over his shoulder? Over his right shoulder is a portrait of his father. And the father is turned slightly, looking in the direction of his son, with a look on his face as if it almost animated to say, "Thank you for defending me."
Yeah.
The positioning of those elements.
Not by accident.
This is not an accident. This is very conceived, and it's the kind of thing that as a decorator, my dad would think about giving the director everything he could possibly want to accomplish the emotions of the moment, and giving the actors the ability to grab onto those things and play them for, for their value.
Yeah, that is an amazing point, that film is shot in different eras and seasons, and it's all quick. I mean, they go through so much of his life, and then the amazing thing about that movie is you don't realize that there's this science fiction element to it, or I don't know if it's science fiction, but you don't realize that everything's going to change until about more than halfway through the movie, when Clarence is introduced and he gets to see how life is if he was never born. Before that, it's kind of like a biography of a young man's life, and so yeah, that as a set director, a lot of challenges for sure, and then culminating in the end, that period when George is not alive anymore and he gets to run around town. I mean, there's so many changes in location, from Nick's Bar to downtown Bedford Falls, to going back to so they had to show the Old Bailey house, both finished and dilapidated. So if you look at it from that perspective, it had to be quite a challenge for sure.
Quite a challenge, and a wonderful opportunity for invention. You mentioned the Bailey home. When you look at the progression, I mean, if you talk in terms of story structure, and you look at the development of the story arc, Mary Hatch talking to George Bailey, looking at the old haunted house, throwing the rock, making the wish, and then you come forward to that moment of the honeymoon, where she has converted that old place into the Waldorf Astoria.
Right.
And the little inventions there. This is set decorating.
Yep.
This is that moment where he comes in and he looks and he can't believe what he is seeing, and the camera gives us the inserts of his points of view, and you look at the record player, and there's the little belt going off to the rotisserie, and the chickens are turning over the fireplace. All these inventions that, just sell this marvelous moment where someone is taking what life has given them and they're making it work.
Even the shot too, when he looks to the bedroom, he realizes, oh, this is my wedding night.
Yeah.
And it looks like pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really amazing stuff, for sure. And then to return to that same home later in the movie, where it is a finished home, and it's a beautiful home, although it has some faults. The banister to the upstairs always comes unattached, and it's drafty, but it certainly felt like a home. And then to go back again later in the film, when George is being shown what life is like if he was never born, and it's abandoned again, and then finally that's where the final scene takes place. And just like I say, if you look at it from the perspective of the person in charge of creating all these worlds and these spaces, it's pretty impressive and key to the success of the film.
Certainly, it's obviously one of the key elements. What you're seeing, an audience sits down and they're getting information by way of the visual. Probably is the visual impact of cinema, I think, is probably the first thing, and it overlays everything. Audio is crucial in supporting it all, but the emotional power of what your eyes take in and read says volumes. As a writer, you can describe something, and it can take quite a while to describe, but with your eyes, in the blink of an eye, you can gather so much information. So how you input information to people and set up things that are going to create emotional reactions, very, very crucial.
Did your father ever share with you his specific stories or things that happened during the creation of It's a Wonderful Life that stood out to you?
His talking about the craziness of working in all the heat and snowfall on the main street there of Bedford Falls.
Was that part of his, not to interrupt you, but was the snow part of
No,
his purview?
snow was done by the special effects guys.
Okay.
But to be there in working in the heat while you're trying to represent winter, it's one of those things that is
Takes a lot of imagination, I'm sure.
imagination, and it's just part of what we do in filmmaking is creating the illusion, convincing people that you really are someplace that you aren't. It was a film that he dearly, dearly loved. I can tell you that years later he was doing a film for Alfred Hitchcock, Rope, which Jimmy Stewart was in. And Jimmy, of course, knowing Dad from It's a Wonderful Life, he made the comment to my dad at this point in his career. He made that comment, It's a Wonderful Life is absolutely my favorite film.
Alfred Hitchcock's favorite film.
No,
Jimmy Stewart's favorite film.
Jimmy
Okay.
Stewart saying this to my dad. And I'm not surprised because when you consider the time of the motion picture, when you consider World War II is now over, when you consider what people like Jimmy who had been in service, what they had seen, what they had experienced, they come out of that and they're now immersed in this lovely, beautiful, inspiring tale written by Frank Capra, who also was involved with the war effort, who also, as an immigrant, appreciated so many of the elements that are contained within the story, the multiple threads that come together to weave into the canvas of the film. It's really, really beautiful. So conversations always were about the impact of the total of the film. You know, it all came together into this remarkable piece, remarkable piece. It's a film continually, my experience, and I, as a filmmaker, as a member of the Motion Picture Academy, I screen films all the time. I've voted on films for years. It's a Wonderful Life is a motion picture that any part of it, anywhere along the way, I can step into the film, it doesn't matter where it is, and immediately hook up to it. And I have never, ever had a yawn moment in the motion picture where I'm looking at it saying that really didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
There are not a lot of motion pictures that I think an audience can say that about.
Yeah, that's true. It's and that's obviously one of the reasons why people can watch it, you know, hundreds of times. I've seen it hundreds of times, and it still elicits an emotional response at the end. And you can pick it up, you know, at the very beginning. You can pick it up halfway through. You can watch that final scene. I've watched the final scene on YouTube, you know, standalone. So definitely a credit to the work that those men did. Everybody involved in that film.
And the work that Donna Reed did also, I want to mention her because her portrayal of Mary is so exquisite. Beautiful woman who absolutely, I mean, it's very clear, as a young girl, she falls in love with this young boy. And when she whispers in his bad ear, I'll love you for the rest of my life, it is a deep, deep, deep truth. And she lives it out. And she is this strong anchor in the center of his life. He is a very eclectic kind of guy who is very emotional. She is the solid force.
Yeah, he needed a grounding element.
Absolutely. You take her out of his life, he's a different guy. She grounded him. And his mother gave him that advice. That beautiful moment. She can help you find the answers. That's just such a beautiful thing. Anyway, so her contribution to it is remarkable.
You know, I agree. I find it hard to believe, though, that if George was never born, that she would end up an old maid. She was too good looking.
People no doubt wonder that because she's a beautiful woman and she certainly was a strong, you know, a strong personality. But it's interesting because maybe, just maybe, she was a person who had a destiny to meet that person.
And if he's not there,
And if he's not there, her life isn't filled.
yep.
And it's the beautiful thing about the yin and the yang, two people coming together to be one for purpose together. Everything that they're doing for each other. They're not doing it because of what they want. It's because of what they want to do as a unit. It's a beautiful part of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, you know, George saved the town, but Mary saved the town.
Yeah.
She gave up her honeymoon.
Yeah.
You know, around the bank. So, yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours about this. But so your father, from taking a role in that film, eventually gets into this position where he is tasked with helping to create, like, you know, if you talk about set decoration and creating worlds, the pinnacle had to be Disney World and Disneyland. I mean, you're creating worlds inside of a world. It's one big fantasy. You know, what are some stories or your take on your father's role in that?
Well, his role was absolutely huge. Decorating the park, where he got all of the lampposts, light fixtures, the creation of all the awnings, all the shops on Main Street, the interiors of restaurants, the attractions that actually required set dressing, whether you're talking Mr. Toad's Wild Ride or whatever. The Golden Horseshoe, which is the saloon in Frontierland.
Mm-hmm.
So many stories I can tell you about all of that. And as a little kid, I had the privilege. He would take me along with him, 1954, going out to Anaheim, which in those days there was no 101 freeway or Interstate 5 going down there. We were driving country highways through orange groves and what have you, through industrial areas to get to Anaheim. And here's this amazing development going on, and I'm trying to process and understand, but I was there in those early months of its construction and watched this place come to life and watched his participation. I remember one day I happened to be with him at the Golden Horseshoe, and some guy drives in with a pickup truck loaded with Texas Longhorns, the horns.
Yeah.
And Dad bought his whole truckload right there on the spot. And those Longhorns are adorning the balcony area of the Golden Horseshoe. There's a wonderful story I love to tell about the Main Street flagpole. Walt and my dad would walk the park together. They would do it on a weekly basis, and they did this all the way up to the point where Walt was infirm years later. But during construction, they would meet on Wednesdays. And this was in April of 1954. The firehouse on Main Street has been completed. Walt Disney and my father are sitting on the concrete steps with their paper bags, having their lunch, talking about what's going on. And Walt Disney, head of a New York Stock Exchange company, turns to my dad and says, "Emile, I'm asking my key executives if you can possibly afford to hold your paycheck for the next few weeks. I would deeply appreciate it. We are really stretched."
Wow.
And fortunately, my dad was able to do that. And then he said, "What are you doing about the Main Street flagpole?" And Dad said, "Well, I've got this design," and he shows him this beautiful bronze design, for a acanthus leaf pattern and a beautiful base. And he says, "I've got the aluminum flagpole, which we would put through it." And Walt said, "Do me a favor, if you haven't done the casting yet, just hold off on that because it's another expense that we could wait until after we're open. Put up the aluminum flagpole.
Mm-hmm.
Great, fine. That night, as Providence would have it, my father's driving down Wilshire Boulevard on his way to the Motion Picture Academy for a screening, and there's a traffic accident. A truck has hit one of the lamp standards on Wilshire Boulevard, and they have these and they're still there, these gorgeous lamps. They have a acanthus leaf
Mm-hmm.
bronze base. The truck had hit, and the snap of the post was up above the base. So my dad parks his car, goes out and gets the foreman on the job and says, what's going to happen to that? And the guy says, well, it's going to probably get sold for scrap.
Yeah.
The next morning, he arranges for his assistant to call City Works in downtown LA, and he gets that base. He buys that base for 5 cents a pound, brings it to the studio, has a sleeve fit in it, puts the aluminum flagpole in it, sends it down to Anaheim, and they put it up. It's still there today.
Huh.
A week after it goes up, Walt and my dad are walking through the park, and Walt sees the base and he sees the flagpole, and he turns to my dad and he says, Emile, I told you not to spend the money on that. And my dad tells him the story, and Walt throws his arms around him and says, that's why I love you. So in invention and seizing opportunities is a big component in all of this. It's not just about being able to write a check, design something, order it,
Mm-hmm.
pay for it. It's about how do you accomplish this, and how do you do it within the context of the moment you're in.
Right.
Walt Disney was financially stretched, as was in many cases in his life, and this was an answer. Anyway.
And so I assume that your exposure to this type of stuff obviously aided you in your career. Like, is there anything else from your dad that stood out that you've taken forward into
Absolutely.
your work?
He, again, I think it goes back to the same thing with Capra. Immigrants to this land who saw this land as a place of opportunity and who seized opportunity and made the most out of everything that they could. And they went into everything with as much preparation as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So research was something that I learned to value in my days beginning at Disney. Disney had a wonderful library. You could pick up the phone, call the librarian, and say, okay, I'm reading a script that deals with this particular era, and I need to know everything that you can possibly tell me about X, Y, and Z. And an hour later, a cart would roll into your office, and books would get put on your desk, tagged to the pages. Well, this was the analog world of Google,
Yeah.
which, here now you just do it on your computer. But research, the value of research, being prepared so that, again, everything that you're doing in the set has meaning, and there's purpose for it, and it belongs there. So a director can have it used, or an actor can walk up to it, and if they choose to pick it up, touch it, some instinct tells them to do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not written in the screenplay. You never know what they're going to do, but you want to give them something that has a life. It's alive. That's the thing in today's world. So many motion pictures are shot in practical locations, practical meaning they really exist. If we're making a movie about this, and I have to create this on a soundstage, every single thing that's in here has to be found and brought in, and it has to have meaning, and it has to work.
Right.
If in the digital world I can walk in here with a camera that's this big, or my phone camera, I don't have to create all of this. So
They can add it in post-production sometimes through
sometimes
technology?
you can, but people have to put in context. You look at a motion picture like It's a Wonderful Life, made largely on a soundstage where the Bailey home was created there. Everything has to be there, as if you really are in a home.
Right. Yeah, that is, and there were no green screens back then, and things like that. So the art of filmmaking is so much different now, and it really did require a lot of authenticity and imagination and resourcefulness to create these worlds back, prior to the digital age of filmmaking. So it's definitely impressive, and I appreciate the stories and the conversation. It's been really interesting. You're here this weekend, so if anybody wants to meet you in person, there's two opportunities, right? Unless they just bump into you downtown during the festival. The first would be Saturday at 11:30. Tell everybody about the documentary.
I produced a documentary about my dad's life 2 years ago, and it is now part of the permanent archives for the Motion Picture Academy, because my dad was a governor for the Motion Picture Academy for 10 years, and as an Oscar winner, what have you. And I put it into competition at an international festival in Beirut, Lebanon last year. I wanted, since that's his ancestral home ground, I wanted that country to experience it, and I'm very proud to say it won the festival Best International Documentary Feature. So Dad's story being told in his ancestral home ground meant a great deal to me and to his legacy. That film is being presented on Saturday at the Trinity Theater.
At 11:30.
At 11:30, and then I believe there's going to be a Q&A afterwards. So
I mean, that's a documentary of a great American story.
yeah, it is a great American story.
Is that something that's available to watch on streaming services, or will it be available elsewhere at some point?
It will be available. I actually have it up in a streaming service now. It's a private matter at this point, but when I make it available, I will certainly let you know, and you can put the link out.
Yep, we'd love to share that with our users for sure. I'd love to see it. I don't know if I can make it Saturday. And then Sunday at 2:30 at the Trinity Church, you and Jimmy Hawkins are going to have a conversation?
Yes, we're going to talk about filmmaking and all of those good things.
Yeah, well, if it's anything like our conversation, it'll be wildly interesting, and hopefully people will turn out for both of those things. If you're coming to Seneca Falls this weekend and you've never been to the Wonderful Life Festival, hold on to your hats. It's gonna, if you love the movie and you love Christmas, you're going to have an amazing time. There's going to be more things to do than you could possibly fit into the weekend. So we'd welcome you to come to Seneca Falls and enjoy it. A lot of people are coming in for the 5K race. Come early in the morning on Saturday and see some of the sites before the race, and we'll look forward to seeing you in Seneca Falls. And John, I really appreciate it. This was a great conversation. I think we could sit here for a couple hours and it would be just as interesting, but I know you've got a busy schedule and a big weekend on tap, so thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here, and I really love what you're doing here. Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So thanks everybody for joining us here on Around the Lakes. I'm Jim Sinacropi. For all of us at FingerLakes1.com, Merry Christmas, and hope you have a fantastic holiday season. Hope to see you in Seneca Falls this weekend.